In the last 5 months, I spent a lot of time working on my laptop making video for this channel. It's time I rebuild my gaming PC slash test bench. The timing was great. Be Quiet sent me a CPU cooler, a case, and a PSU to test and review. I'm not compensated for this review, but they did send the hardware for free. They don't have any saying in the editorial content, and they didn't ask. Okay, so let's talk about the spec first. I will also explain during the unboxing why I choose those components. The processor is the AMD Ryzen 7800 X3D. The motherboard is the Asus Tuff B650E Wi-Fi. For storage, I use the XPG S70 Blade 1TB. For the GPU, I kept my Asus Dual 3070. The memory is the G.skill Flare X5 32 gigs at 6000 MHz CL30. For the case, we have the Dark Base 701 in white. The CPU cooler is the Dark Rock Pro 5. And the PSU is the Straight Power 12 1000 watt. Let's unbox the case first. First impression is that the build quality and the craftsmanship is awesome. You mostly can go toolless using the thumb screw. You have three 140mm silent wing fan. The case is in the premium category and I'm impressed with the versatility. You can mount in front or on top a 360mm AIO. You have a hub where you can plug up to 8 fans and 2 RGB fan or device. You have 2 buttons in front, one to control the case fan speed, one to cycle through the RGB modes. You have one USB-C, 2 USB-A, and phone and microphone 3.5mm jack. I will need to try in another video, but you can also invert the layout. The computer will be on the floor on my left, so it would make sense to invert it. But for the build, I wanted to use it the way it shipped. There's also plenty of way to route the cable. The power supply is hidden from the view if you left the plastic shroud, but you can also mount an additional fan on it. The legs are high enough that you can mount the PSU upside down without choking it. And you have dust filter on top, bottom, and also on the front. You have a very heavy and thick tempered glass on one side and a soundproof wall on the other side. Now let's move to the motherboard. I wanted a PCI Express 5.0 motherboard. The B650 motherboard also being the feature versus price suite ratio for AM4 with the B450 and the B550. Also, Be Quiet are known for the black aesthetic, so I wanted to do a black and white build. So having the motherboard in all black fit that criteria. I wanted to back USB-C port, but I sacrificed one for PCI Express 5.0. It's also been a while that I did an Intel build, but the issue is that being a dead socket right now, it makes more sense to go with AM5. Now the 7900X and the 7900 X3D have 4 more core, 12 versus 8. So it would have been interesting to test them in DaVinci Resolve and to see how much my rendering time would be cut. The issue is that the 7900 X3D has 2 CIC and it seems slower in gaming, having scheduling issue depending of the game. So it didn't really make sense to get it. But they are like $10 to $15 of each other. So depending if it's more a productivity machine or a gaming machine, one processor versus the other could make sense. The CPU cooler is next. You can use a CPU up to 270 watt TDP. Now the 7800 X3D is only 120 watt, and I think it boosts at 136. So I don't really expect cooling issue. There's also no thermal paste apply on the CPU cooler, but it comes with it. You also get a magnetic screwdriver in the box, which is a nice touch, and I end up using it for the rest of it. You have two silent wing fans that are better quality than the one you often find on cheaper CPU cooler. For thermal paste, I use the Thermal Hero Quantum. I received three other kind of thermal paste from Thermal Hero, and there's also the one that came in the box with the CPU cooler. So it's possible if I'm motivated to make another video when I just test them to see which one is the best one, and if it really make an impact on thermal performance. Though there's an issue with that. Except if you can apply the paste mechanically or with a robot, the pressure you can apply the thermal paste can be different. You can have different spreading pattern. So if the temperature doesn't seem to be what you expect from a cooler, I'll always assume it's a user error and try to reapply it. Now everyone has a different technique, so I should have tried the 9 dot that the guide suggests, but I just wanted to see if everything was working. So yeah, don't judge the thermal paste application. Now for this build, because you have RGB in front of the case, I decided to go with no RGB for the rest of the component. For the memory, AMD said that 6000 MHz is the sweet spot for the 8000 series CPU. So I choose a low profile one with a CL30. You can see here that it fit the cooler without issue, but you could always put the front fan a little higher if you have a different memory that is a little larger. For the GPU, I kept my Asus Dual 3070. With the cost of GPU during the pandemic, I don't feel like it's worth upgrading yet. Now, the case comes with a 1000 watt CPU, and the fact that I want to play with machine learning, which is connects to my day job, I could see upgrading the GPU in the future. It was easy to install and you had plenty of space. Now you could route the GPU wire at the back of the case, at the lower part of the motherboard, but the wire that came with the power supply are kind of thick, and I just wanted to make sure that everything was working, so I just put them in the extra space for the fan. For power supply, we have the straight power 12, which is a 80 plus platinum PSU. At 1000 watt, it will be perfect for the test bench and upgrading in the future. The first impression is the weight of the box. It's heavy. Even the two cable group felt heavy. Now, I always see PSU as an utilitarian device. You want to have enough power for it, you want to be efficient, but normally you'll use it in many builds, so it makes sense to get a good one. The RGB is very bright, and I didn't try to play with the intensity level. There's a button on front to cycle through the color and pattern. You can see that I did an okay job for cable managing. Honestly, the case is already great at that, and I didn't plug a lot of component to start anyway. In general, I only plug one drive that I'm going to put the OS on it, so if there's an issue with the BIOS or some kind of corruption, at least I'm not going to erase all my drive in one shot. So let's talk performance next. It rendered in 21 minutes 17 seconds on my new PC versus 30 minutes with my 5600X CPU and the same GPU. Now my MacBook Air still crushed it in 13 minutes, or 11 minutes with the M3 MacBook Pro with 36 gig of RAM. In the end though, it didn't really matter, because maybe I'm gonna make 1 or 2 videos a week. So the 21 minutes versus 30 minutes versus 13 minutes doesn't make a big difference in the end. For temperature, the room was at 26 degrees Celsius. While I was leaving the computer in BIOS and changing setting, the temperature of the CPU was between 41 to 43 Celsius. Now, I decided to go in Windows and looping Prime 95 while the CPU was at 100%, and the temperature went up to 62 degrees. Then I switched to Cinebench R30 at 24, and it went up to 78 degrees Celsius. With Resolve, the rendering got to a temperature of 79 Celsius. For a second, it went at 80 Celsius, which is yellow in Ryzen Master, but only for a second, and then it switched back to green. Now the TG Max for that processor is 89 Celsius. Now I have no issue with those temperatures because they are worst case scenario. I'm running the CPU at 100% utilization for a long time. But Windows was stable, I didn't have a crash. I was also curious if using a different thermal paste will change the result. But in the end, if it was not for a review, I would just leave it like that. For Cinebench, the single core result was 111. You had 1129 for multicore, and the GPU was 9994, which gave me a ratio of multicore versus single core of 9.28. Gaming was next. I used my ultra-wide monitor that have a resolution of 3440 by 1440 at 60 Hz. The monitor is overclocked at 75 Hz. I started with 80s. I got to 600 FPS, which seems to be a hard cap. It was a very stable cap though. Cyberpunk was at high setting with ray tracing low. And in open era in the wasteland, it was around 47 FPS in average. Using DLSS balance, I got to 95 FPS average. Destiny 2 at high was 150 FPS in the tower and dropped to 125 FPS average in Neo-Numa during a fight. Divinity Original Sin was around 146 FPS in Fort Joy and dropped to 125 FPS on average during a fight. Red Dead Redemption 2 was around 60 FPS, 68 FPS at balance preset, and 98 FPS for balanced DLSS. Now Starfield was all over the place, which is expected for a Bethesda game. In Neon, a big city, inside I got 66 FPS average. It dropped to 42 outside, with a lot of people walking around and talking. I got to 42 FPS average with FSR 3. Then, if I add frame generation to FSR, I got 75 FPS average, but of course it had input lag. DLSS balance got it to 72 FPS average. Now my first impression of the CPU is that 3D cache make the 1% low way higher, and it's good because normally that make your experience better because you really notice the 1% low dip. I was time constrained with traveling, so I need to test rendering and gaming more when I come back. Now let's look at the conclusion for the three components that Be Quiet sent. For the power supply, like I said earlier, PSU are a utilitarian for me. It's buy and forget device, except if you don't have enough power or it's unstable. With motherboard issue, I think that PSU issue are the toughest to diagnose because they can provoke random issue on your computer. On the positive side, it's a very quiet PSU and you have a lot of power to spare. Being 80 plus platinum, you know it's very efficient. It's fully modular. You have ATX 3.0, PCI Express 5.0. You have a 600 watt connector, a great build quality, and a 10-year warranty, which is expected in that category. Now, on the negative, the price is one. It's competitive versus similar platinum 1000 watt PSU, like the Corsair 1000i, but there's also no 0 RPM mode. It's not really an issue in that case anyway. You won't hear the sound of the PSU with the tempered glass and the soundproof back panel. Nitpicking also, I couldn't find the PSU on Cybernetic website, but the Straight Power 11 is. Now you will have certain sites like Gamer Nexus that will test a PSU in detail, opening them, testing the voltage, the build quality, see if they will shut down if you trip a power surge. I don't have this equipment, so I decided to focus on the end user experience for now. For the CPU cooler, it's very quiet, probably the most quiet air cooler I had a chance to test since I built the computer. It's really easy to test and disassemble if you need. The Silent Wing fan are great quality, and the build quality of the cooler is also great. Now, it didn't have problem to cool the 7800 X3D at a TDP of 120 watt. For the negative, the price is one, because again, the MSRP in Canada seems to be $134.99 Canadian. Memory Express has it on sale at $89.99, but it's sold out right now. The cooler look great, it's easy to install, and you have quality fan and it's super quiet. But if you're doing a budget build, you can also get a Peerless Assassin for $42. You can get the Deepcool AK620 for $82. And the Noctua D15, which always been the leader, is $109.99. The same price that the Dark Rock Pro 5 is in most stores in Canada. Depending on the price you choose for your cooler, you could sacrifice thermal performance or noise performance. And in my case, the combo of CPU cooler, PSU, and case that Be Quiet sent made a really quiet PC when gaming or rendering. I got as low as 37 decibel next to the case. Now, I do want to test the Dark Rock Pro more. And I know a lot of reviewers still use AM4 to still have the same component except the cooler. Because I also have different thermal paste, it would be interesting to just make sure that it's not user error and I can get better performance out of it. Now for my processor, the temperature were fine, and depending on your budget, the issue is that you could find cheaper option that would also perform better thermally. Now let's talk about the case. I really like working with it. It's easy, you mostly don't need a screwdriver. The build quality is great. You have many options for the layout. Sure, if you want to put a 420mm AIO, you'll need a different case. But for the rest, you can mount it in front or on top. You have the Silent Wing 4 fan that are really good. I maybe want to add more just to see if it make a difference. But the case is really silent if you leave the fan at low, which seems to be between 600 and 700 RPM. It was very eye-opening playing a game and having almost no noise versus the QL300 that I was using before. Sure, we're talking about a $40 case versus a $275 one. So you can see that there's a craftsmanship and research and development that was in the case design. You can also invert it, and you have a button for fan speed and one for cycling the RGB. Now, if you're using a lot of hard drive, 3.5-inch one, You'll need an optional bay for it, and you don't have a lot of space for them. Also, while routing the thick cable of the PSU, it was tight to get them behind the motherboard and the GPU. Feasible, but you need to be careful. Now, it's a premium case. Like, it's sell around 275 to 325 MSRP in Canada. There's a lot of option for premium case in that range, and you should really need to make sure that you get all the feature that you want and need. You can see how it bring a lot of value and it could last many builds. But I won't blame a consumer that would try to save on and getting a cheaper case, knowing that they won't have the versatility and the future proofing, but that money would spend elsewhere getting other component. So thanks for watching.